Welcome back to the fifth and final lecture in psychopathology. We stopped the fourth lecture talking about the different types of schizophrenia. Let's continue with one more slide about schizophrenia. Schizophrenia has a genetic basis. We can look at the concordance rate of the disease. A concordance rate is the percentage of relatives who show the same trait. A child of a parent with schizophrenia has a 15% better chance than the regular population of getting the disease. With two parents diagnosed, the child has a 40% greater chance of developing schizophrenia than the normal population does. And an identical monozygotic twin with the disease only gives the other twin a 50% better chance of acquiring the diagnosis than the rest of the population. This shows that there is a genetic link, but that the environment also plays a role. I have included a link to a great 50-minute Discovery Channel documentary on YouTube about schizophrenia. The video has an interview with John Nash, who is an economics Nobel Prize winner, who is also the subject of the 2001 movie A Beautiful Mind, starring Russell Crowe, and also talks to John Nash's son. Both of them have schizophrenia. The video also talks about two twins in England with schizophrenia, one with the diagnosis, the other without the diagnosis. It follows a number of other people as well. The information on the twins in England is specifically interesting because it shows the effects of the environment on acquiring the diagnosis. The twin without schizophrenia has a bigger brain than the twin with the diagnosis. I know you may ask, don't they have the same genetics? Shouldn't they have the same brain size? Well, in evaluating their life, the doctors found that the birth of the older twin went very well, but the younger twin was born a blue baby. His umbilical cord was kinked, and the life in the womb between the two twins was very different. One got all the nutrition and oxygen he needed, and the other did not. We also find that the twin with the schizophrenia tried drugs prior to showing the first symptoms of the disease. He was already vulnerable to the disease because of the environment in which he developed in the womb. And if you are susceptible to a health problem, you need to be very careful in life. Something in your environment which would not harm others can produce negative results for you. This is the diathesis stress hypothesis, which states that genetic factors place an individual at risk, but environmental stress factors transform the potential risk into an actual disorder. This is true of any genetic potential. You are born with the potential to be schizophrenic, or smart, or sick, and then the environment will help to, or hinder the development of your potential. This is the nature-nurture debate all over again. Consider this. While tranquilizers suppress active schizophrenia and are useful in the treatment of the disorder, there are drugs used in the past that stimulate dopamine production in the brain, which produces the symptoms of schizophrenia. This is important to know because in the past, patients came into the hospital for treatment of some other disorder and were given these drugs. After a while taking the drugs, the patient started acting like they had schizophrenia and were diagnosed with a disorder. We already found out that once you have been diagnosed with schizophrenia, doctors are very reluctant to take back that diagnosis. You are stuck for life with a diagnosis simply because you were given a drug by the hospital for a different issue that produced the symptoms of schizophrenia. When you remove those drugs, by the way, the symptoms disappear, but the diagnosis remains. Now let's leave schizophrenia and move on to personality disorders. These are conditions including a chronic, pervasive, inflexible, and maladaptive pattern of thinking, emotion, social relationships, and impulse control. First, we will look at narcissistic personality disorder, which is characterized by a grandiose sense of self-importance and a preoccupation with fantasies of success and power and a need for constant attention. These people respond to criticism inappropriately. If you ask them if they got their hair cut, something that we do on a regular basis to people that we know, they would take it as an attack. They can also feel entitled to favors without any obligation. Their mindset is, you should feel privileged to have done something for me, and to me, you are meaningless, so I have no obligation to help you. I gave you the honor of helping me. This makes it easy for them to exploit others, and they are unable to understand other people's feelings. Next is antisocial personality disorder, which is characterized by a long-standing pattern of irresponsible behavior, indicating a lack of conscience and a diminished sense of responsibility to other people. Children may start out killing bugs and advance to torturing and then killing animals until they do the same to humans. Men are 4 times more likely to acquire this disorder than women. These types of people do not experience shame or intense emotions. Psychopaths and sociopaths have this disorder and tend toward criminal behavior. 2 to 3% of the population has this disorder, and those that are not criminals would probably do very well in the Senate, the House of Representatives, and the Oval Office, and in law firms. Now, I know that's a joke, but there's some truth to it. As a defense attorney, you do not care if your client did the crime. It is the attorney's responsibility to get his client off or reduce the sentence. The attorney needs to put doubt in the minds of the jury. An antisocial personality disorder could do this without any regret. There is an excellent example of a recent case with a murderer named Gary Ridgway. Imagine you are the prosecuting attorney in 2001 and you have Gary on 4 murders with DNA evidence and suspect that there are 2 more. You have enough proof that there is no way the jury will have any doubt and Gary is going to the electric chair for the 4 murders. Gary's defense attorney comes to you and asks you to take the death sentence off the table. Why would you do that? You ask him. I have him on 4 murders. Well, the defense attorney then asks you, if you could close some more murder cases, if he could do that for you, would you take the death sentence off the table? So you ask him, how many more are we talking about? I already have him on 4 murders. Are we talking about 8 murders? And the defense says, well, what if it's more? How many do you need to close to take the death sentence off the table? So you ask him, well, are we talking about 16? And the defense nods and says more. Gary was eventually convicted of 48 prostitute murders and runaway murders. And he says he killed 96 and he had no remorse. He thinks he did society a favor, getting rid of the prostitutes. Oh, and his definition of a prostitute was any girl walking alone on the street, so he murdered many women who were not prostitutes. When he learned this, he wasn't upset. They shouldn't have been walking alone. Some people are relatively healthy individuals with a minor issue that they cannot resolve on their own. We call these people the worried well. Some issue that may cause a person to worry or feel anxious are mild depression, or marital problems, or physical complaints. Academic problems, that's something that all students can relate to. Parent-child issues, bereavement, loss of someone that you love, and malingering, all of which are easy to work with and are still issues that a person has that to that person are very debilitating. Should be noted that shyness is a distressing pattern of avoiding or withdrawing from social contact, and it is not in the DSM manual, the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual. If you can't successfully navigate society and the feelings give you personal distress, then it can be classified and should be treated as agoraphobia. But shyness is just a symptom of the pathology. Shyness by itself is not a pathology. Let's talk about labeling people. What happens when we label people? Ideally, an accurate diagnosis can lead to proper treatment, but diagnosis may also become labels that depersonalize people and allow us to ignore the social and cultural context in which their problems arose. Once they have labeled a person, people feel a loss of responsibility toward that person, as if the labeling process concluded our responsibilities. For instance, we might say, "What's wrong with him?" And someone would say, "Oh, he's schizophrenic." "Oh, well, we found the problem and labeled them. Now we're done." Instead, we should look at the label as only the first part of a responsibility to another human being. Now that we know what is wrong, how can we make their life better? How can we act around that person to make them more comfortable? What does she or he need to make life easier? Diagnostic labels can also compound the problem. In many instances, the prognosis occurs because of the labeling. For instance, my grandfather had cancer many years ago when there were very few options other than surgery. He went in for surgery, and the surgeon came out of the operating room and told the family that the cancer was too invasive and to take it out would remove so many organs that he would die. He was given 6 months to live. The family told the surgeon to tell my grandfather they had gotten the cancer and that he had to take medication because he had some of his colon removed. So no one told him the prognosis. 12 years later, a new doctor told him he had cancer and had 6 months to live. And 6 months later, my grandfather died. Once the mind accepts death, it comes quickly. The cultural context of mental disorder labeling is also an issue. When we label someone, we treat them differently. When we treat them differently, they behave differently. So a man living on the street is labeled a bum, and we treat them the way we would treat any vagrant. The man on the street may be a father who lost his job when the company went under because of the recession, and because of his depression and his age, he has trouble finding a job. He loses his house to foreclosure, his car is repossessed. He may have resumes submitted and he is looking for a job, but in the meantime he needs money to live, so he begs on the street. We treat him like any other homeless man, and soon he'll start acting more and more like a bum. When we label a person with a pathology, it compounds the symptoms. Finally, let's talk about insanity. Insanity is a legal term. It is not a psychological or psychiatric term. It is referring to a person who is unable, because of mental disorder or defect, to confirm his or her behavior to the law. Only a judge can label a person as insane. The judge will consult psychiatrists and psychologists, but insanity is purely a legal term. It is not used as much as you are led to believe on movies and on TV. Juries find it hard to believe that a person is not capable of thinking correctly. And if they actually are insane, then they are a danger to the population and they should be jailed. Innocent by reason of insanity should really be guilty by reason of insanity, and then the sentencing phase of the trial should take into account the person's temporary or long-term insanity. And that's it for this section. I'll talk to you again in the next presentation.